I am so excited that you are here for today's webinar because here's the thing. I am so passionate about real estate and taking out some of the overwhelm that I feel like there's a lot of noise out there. And my goal with tonight's webinar is to cover a wide variety of topics, but to hopefully have you leaving feeling like this is really possible for you, whether you are wanting to get in the game as a new investor or you're wanting to continue to grow your portfolio in a way that feels really aligned for you and for your current or future family. So, let's dig into all the juice here. So, what are we talking about tonight? I want to give you a quick backstory on my husband, Sina, and I's investing journey so you can understand a little bit more about our portfolio and kind of how this came to be, because I think there are a lot of you that will relate specifically to our story, or at least one part of our story. I also really love breaking down by the numbers example properties. In particular, I want to focus on some of the Colorado markets that we invest in and walk you through real numbers of our properties or client properties. I also want to talk about how buying out of state works. Sometimes when I'm talking to potential clients or new investors, they're a little bit nervous about investing out of state when they're looking at Colorado. And there's so many benefits that we're going to get into of investing in Colorado, even if you are out of state. But I just want to like reassure you with the ease and how it can actually be really beneficial for you to not live physically close to your property, especially when you're getting it launched. And so we're going to dive into all of that. We're also going to talk about tax advantages for short-term rental owners. I want to go high level on this, but I want you to really understand this could be game changer for you. And like as soon as I learned about short-term rental tax loops, I literally am like, I need to tell everybody about this because it could honestly be so beneficial in your life. Then we're going to get into some loan options. I like to say in plain English because I think sometimes loans can just feel really overwhelming. And I want to share with you some of the loan products that my husband and I have used to grow our portfolio very quickly. And also some of the loan options that if you're working with a loan agent who is not familiar with investing, might not even know about these types of loan products. So I want to talk about that and then go through the step-by-step buying process. Obviously, if you and I were working together, but also if you're working with an investor-friendly agent who knows the landscape of this type of world in the short-term rental space, the process is a little bit different than if you were working with a primary residence real estate agent. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to get into some juicy mistakes to avoid because there are so many things that we do, whether it's like mindset blocks or stories that we tell ourselves that keep us on the sidelines, waiting for the perfect time to invest, or ways that we approach our investing journey that are really hindering our revenue and then in turn hindering your ability to have more freedom and choices in your life, which is a really important through line for me and why I really care about serving you in tonight's webinar. So let's get into that. So quick backstory on me. I'm a wife. This is my husband, Zena. We've been together since we were 19 years old. We met at a college house party. Crazy story. I'll save that one for another day. And then I am a mom of 1.5 exactly. We have a toddler son named Brody. And then I am pregnant with number two, 20 weeks pregnant, so halfway with a little girl. So we're very excited to be in this stage of life and to see how some of the choices that we made by getting into the real estate game have tremendously impacted our optionality for this exact season of our life that we were looking forward to. I also am the host of Empower Her podcast, which maybe you and I got connected from that show. I started that podcast at the end of 2018. Large show, over 13 million downloads, one of the top personal development and business podcasts. I've loved the community that I've built around that show. I still release episodes every single week. And honestly, that's where my business stemmed from, which actually did really help us get into the real estate game. And what I mean by that is everything that I was doing in my business since I've been an entrepreneur since 2015 has been about helping serve women in some capacity, whether that's podcasters. I've helped hundreds of women launch podcasts, grow and monetize their shows, hosting big live events, helping women in the one-on-one coaching or in masterminds or in memberships or in courses that are online business owners to create more freedom and options. I've done a lot of that for many, many years. And I loved that chapter of my life and how I served women in that way. But in the back of my head, I always thought, I'm going to keep running at this pace for forever because everything that I'm doing in my business requires me to be on. And, that's typical for a lot of personal brand based businesses or businesses in general. And of course, that's common for W-2 employees, right? That like if you don't show up to your job, you're not getting a paycheck. Well, everything I did in my business, like I said, required me to be on. I did a lot of keynote speaking, podcasting, all of that, right? So when in 2021, my husband, Sina, who was a dentist at the time, came to me and he was like, Keisha, I do not want to be a dentist anymore. I hate this. I knew that he hated it. And I was like the number one hype girl that was like, yes, quit your job. Because honestly, like I wanted him to be happy and fulfilled. Like I said, we've been together for a long time. He's my best friend. Like I just wanted him to be excited about what he's doing, like I was. But also, full transparency, I just didn't want my husband and the future father of my kids to be doing something that was like sucking his soul. Like his energy was impacting me. So when he told me that he wanted to leave dentistry and get into real estate investing, I didn't even know what that would look like. But I was his number one hype girl because he was going to do something that he was excited about, but also because I connected the dots quickly. That if we were to take active income from my business that required me to be on, but I really loved, and pour it into real estate assets that are more passive and could give us more freedom and choices and financial stability and options, it was going to create a totally different lifestyle for us. So we started heavily investing in real estate in 2022. We were actually at one point in time buying a property a quarter. We now have an almost $7 million portfolio, and the cash flow, it's heavily weighted in short-term rentals. We also have midterm and long-term. I'll get into that in a second. Um, but the cash flow of it, like we're able to live our lifestyle off of the cash flow, which has given us a lot of choices. Last June, I actually had this moment where I was really confused about what I wanted to do next in my own life. And I know maybe some of you can connect with that, where you get to a season where you're like looking around, like, is this what I want to do? And we had been on a fertility journey at that point in time. I had had two miscarriages, and I was like, I just need to take a break. So I closed down all my courses, all my programs, all my coaching. And the only reason I felt comfortable doing that was because of real estate. So when I got my footing again, I got really excited and I was like, well, what would I want to do next career-wise? I want to keep the podcast. I still release weekly episodes. I love the community around the show. But I was like, real estate. Like, I want to help people invest in real estate so they can create more freedom and options and choices for their current or future family too. Like, I love this landscape. We've been investors for 4 years now. I've learned so much. And so I decided to get my license in Colorado. So now I'm a licensed agent and I specialize in investments, whether that is someone, buying their primary home, wanting to do a sort of house hack to drive in income to offset their mortgage, or even, things like we've done, buying short-term rental properties, buying small multifamily. So we're going to dig into all of that. But really, like I said, real estate gave us more options and more stability. And I just want that for you. I want that for you and your family. So I'm excited to dig into all the stuff tonight. So breaking down our portfolio. A lot of people ask me questions around this. So in February of 2022, exactly 4 years ago to this day, February 18th, we bought our first long-term rental in Phoenix, Arizona. Phoenix seems kind of random. We've never lived in Phoenix, but I had a friend and mentor who had built up a $50 million real estate portfolio in long-term rentals. And because he was our mentor and he was the only person that we knew that was investing in real estate, like at that level, we're like, well, let's just do what this guy did. So we bought this long-term rental. We still have the long-term rental today. It actually, like, we pulled all of our money out of it after we refinanced it. So it's actually not a cash flow machine, but it got us in the game. And after we got in the game, we started to think about like what could be next for us. We moved from Austin, Texas, where we were living, to Denver, Colorado, where we live now. And at that point in time, we were like, we need to get into different asset classes because long-term rentals are awesome, but there's not much cash flow. So it's not going to change your lifestyle immediately. I still do believe in like real estate fundamentals of like buying a property and holding it over time, knowing that 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road, it's going to be worth more than it is now. And that short-term rental or like Airbnb is a strategy just as long-term rental and mid-term rental is. And we'll get into all of that tonight. So I believe in real estate, but it didn't make me super excited. I didn't know our tenants. We had a property manager. Like there was no creative element to it. So when we got to Denver, we ended up buying a quadplex that we do midterm rentals in. So midterm rentals meaning 30-day plus stays. And that's been an awesome experience in itself because we have, we get to advertise that property on Airbnb as well for 30-day plus stays. We would have actually done I'll get into this in a second. We would have actually done short-term rental because of the cash flow potential, but because this particular property is in an area in Colorado where it has to be your primary residence if you want to short-term rental it, we decided to do midterm. So we furnished that property. Then we bought our first short-term rental. We call it Peach House. I'm going to break down the deal for you in a second. That's what got us into the short-term rental game, and we were hooked. We had this property that now it sleeps 16, and that property changed our perspective on what was possible from a financial realm. And yeah, it really got us hooked. So we bought our next Airbnb. We called it Champagne House. It was kind of the same demographic that Peach House had. We actually ended up selling that last year as a turnkey property. And we made about $225,000 on selling that property because a lot of investors are looking for turnkey properties that are ready to rock for, Airbnb that have historical revenue and also have, projected bookings. And they're looking for that because they want tax savings. So we sold it to an investor that wanted that because they were in the midst of a 1031 exchange. So I'll get into that in a second. But I like to just highlight that because we have had so many different types of real estate assets that we've bought. But when you treat these, real estate pieces of property as businesses, there's also a lot of potential, right? Like we sold Champagne House as a business. It is a business and it was also a piece of real estate. After that, we decided to go rural mountains. We bought what we call the Tiny A-Frame in Bailey, Colorado, which is a rural mountain town about an hour west of Denver. And then I got pregnant with our now almost 2.5-year-old, and I panicked because at the time that we bought all of those properties that I mentioned, we were living in an apartment in downtown Denver. And a lot of times people talk about like renting as quote unquote throwing your money away on rent. But we had the money to invest in these properties, and the vision was let's buy these income producing assets so that when we get to the point that we want to buy a primary home, all of our assets can pay for our mortgage on our primary and can pay for our lifestyle. And that's exactly what we did. But because I was pregnant, I had this weird thing happen that like maybe some of you can connect with, where I was like, we have to own a home because I have to paint a nursery. Otherwise, what are we gonna do? And to be honest, like looking back, I probably would have continued renting and we would have just built our portfolio without taking this stop there to buy a primary. But here we are and whatever, right? It's great. So we did that. And then we went back to the mountains again and we bought another A-frame in Alma, which is about 25 minutes from Breckenridge. Even if you're not local to Colorado, you've probably heard of Breckenridge, a major ski resort. And that property crushes too. So I'll break down the deal on that as well. Now, currently, we are building another property in Bailey, Colorado, and we're looking for land to potentially do another build, and we'll likely buy our next property in Blue River or Breckenridge. So, yes, I'm an agent who is investor friendly, but I'm also an active investor. Like we're like full transparency, we take active income and we're putting into real estate assets. So I know the landscape of this really well. So to kind of break this down a little bit, why invest in Airbnb in short-term rental? Number one, higher income potential like cash flow, especially in comparison to long-term rental or midterm rental. I can't even give you the numbers of like the comparison between long-term and Airbnb. It completely depends on the property and the location. But midterm rental, we typically say that it's about 1.5 to 2 times the rent that you would get for a long-term rental. So again, midterm rental is 30-day plus stays. So they're furnished, but they're not furnished to the degree that like a short-term rental is. Like short-term rentals sometimes have like neon lights and they're a little bit over the top because you're really targeting to someone who wants to have that experience for a weekend or for a couple of days. But midterm rentals, they're living in it for 30 days. So like they don't necessarily want a neon light like in their room. I mean, some people do, but that's not really the vibe, right? So, higher income potential is why we were interested in short-term rentals. Lifestyle, right? Like a potential vacation property for your family. You're buying a property in the mountains that you want to go visit, or you're buying a property in a different location. It's just cool to have that as an asset. We've hosted Peach House, one of our properties that's really close to our primary home. It's actually bigger than our primary home. We've hosted, bachelorette parties at that house. We hosted our son's first birthday at that house because it has so much space. So it's been cool to have these assets that we can also use for our family. Number three, like strong tax strategy for high earners, whether you are a W-2 income earner or a business owner. Buying short-term rental has completely different tax strategy, what's called a short-term rental loop that we're going to talk about in a second with bonus depreciation that can offset your active income. And that can be completely game changer. Like we're going to get into that. Okay. Number four, forced appreciation through design and amenities, right? Like you're increasing the value of the property because when it is a short-term rental, you are thinking about the experience of your guest, which can often overall increase the value of the asset itself. Obviously, more freedom, faster optionality for future you. If you can't tell already, that's something that's really important to me is I'm always thinking about a future version of me and giving her more options, thinking about different stages of like when we have kids or, as your parents get older, you want just more choices or different stages of life. I'm always thinking about what can I do now that she, a future version of me, will be grateful for. And then honestly, just like properties that you can be excited about and proud of because you're just excited to have them in your portfolio. And a lot of times when we're buying short-term rental properties, we're thinking about that lens of it. And like there are so many times when I'm talking to people, I'm like, I have to show you our A-frame or I have to show you this cute property that we have. And it's just fun too, to get to build up your portfolio like that. So, why invest in Colorado specifically? Of course, this is the market that I know the best, that I'm the most comfortable with, that I personally invest in, but it also just makes a lot of sense from a strategic perspective. When I'm talking with new clients that are trying to compare different markets, I'm like, let's talk about Colorado so I can explain to you why I think it could be advantageous and then look at other markets through that lens too. Obviously, when you're buying in Colorado, you're not betting on like a random place to just blow up. You're investing in an established destination. Like we have all major sport teams here. Taylor Swift for my Swifties, which I know I got some Swifties on here. Taylor Swift comes here. Sundance is coming. Like it's a very desirable location, and a lot of money is invested into this. And there's so much to do in Colorado, which is why it's a popular vacation destination. What I also really love that a lot of people don't talk about, but I actually love that there are specific regulations in most Colorado markets. So, why this is cool if you were to invest in some market that doesn't have any legislations, that's cool for its own reason. But I actually think that why my husband and I have only invested in markets that do have regulations is because we think of this asset that we're buying as a separate business. So we want to know what are the rules for the business. And if you're investing in a short-term regulated market, you know what the rules are, right? This is the type of property that needs to be, this is the well, this is the acreage it has to have for it to be a short-term rental. You abide by those rules. Your business is operating by those rules. And then obviously the town or the city is making money from Airbnb, so they're keeping these Airbnbs. Also, like from a hedge fund perspective, it's like they're avoiding Colorado because they're not just going to come in and buy a bunch of properties here because every single little market, like there's pockets of Denver Metro that have a Denver address that you can short-term rental, but then there are pockets that you literally are not allowed to short-term rental. So you working with someone who can like comb through the legislation with you is really important. But that's why when it makes it more complicated, these big guys aren't coming in and scooping up tons of properties and putting in like a lazy river that you're having to, compete with because it's just more difficult to navigate the landscape. Obviously, year-round tourism, ski season, summer hiking, fall colors, which means like diversified demand throughout the seasons. Higher cash flow opportunity because of that demand means more options long term, right? Because Colorado is such a desirable place, there are also more exit strategies than other markets. There are people that just want to live in Colorado. So there's a lot of optionality for long-term rentals, for midterm rentals, especially if you're in the metro areas, right? Like traveling nurses, corporate professionals, people that are coming into town because they work remotely and they want to test out Colorado and see if they want to move here. That's a lot of the types of tenants that we get in those midterm rentals. And I just like to talk with clients when the goal is short-term rental. I also want to map out the numbers on other strategic strategies that could be really helpful for them so it can help them like alleviate any of the risk or the fear that they have when getting into the short-term rental game. So when I say Denver market, I'm specifically referring to Denver Metro, rural mountains. These are towns that, if you're local to Colorado, you've probably heard of, but if you're from out of state, you might not know about. But they have a ton of cash flow opportunity because Denver locals want to go up to the mountains and they might not even go all the way up to the resort mountains. They just want little getaways that are close to Denver Metro. And then, of course, resort mountains, which are just desirable places that people are vacationing to all year long. So let me give you a real property breakdown. So Peach House, one of our properties that I mentioned is in the Denver metro area. If you're familiar with Colorado, it's in Wheat Ridge. So it's like right close to downtown Denver. We built out this property with the vision of it being for group trips, bachelorette parties. Like if you want to, you can take a little picture of the little QR code that I have there and you can pull up the listing. Like it's so dang cute. Or if you want to go on Instagram, if you and I are connected on Instagram at Kacia Ghetmiri, you can find this. Peach House is what it's called, peachhouse.denver, and see tons of cute pictures. This property, is essentially what we bought that because we didn't buy a primer. We had this cash that we could put 20% down. It was a 975K purchase price. We put a lot into renovation. We added a bedroom, so we had to, add in an egress window, and we put in some baller amenities that you can see in the picture there, like the cedarwood hot tub, and the outdoor we have a little mini golf course and all of this. So annually, it does about $180,000 in revenue. And because of bonus depreciation, the tax advantage that you can use as a short-term rental host, we took $200,000 off of our taxable income the year that we purchased this property. So as you can imagine, if you and your significant other made, say, $200,000 a year together, imagine if you were not taxed, you had no taxable income. You're getting a tax return, like a fat check in the mail, which is really freaking cool. So this is one of our properties in the Denver metro area. Denver metro properties range from 600,000 to 1.5 million dollars, right? Anywhere in that range. Like at Good Neighbor, the brokerage that I work at, we sell properties that range again from like that 500,000 for even 450 up to $7 million. So it's a wide range, depending upon the market that you're in and what type of asset that you're looking for. Okay, let me break down another one. This is another one of our properties in Alma. This is 25 minutes from Breckenridge. I would call this like a rural mountain property. The purchase price was $675,000. For this particular property, we did a 25% down because we had to do an investment loan because we were growing our portfolio so quickly. We just had to use different loan products, which I'm going to get into in a second. For most people, especially if you have not bought a short-term rental before, all of the like loan like people that I work with, like the lenders that I send my clients to, know about different types of investment products, and all sorts of strategies. But most people, a second home loan is a really great option when you're buying a short-term rental because often you can just do 10% down. So keep a little bit more cash in your pocket. But in our case, because we had to do an investment loan and it was 25% down, we had a big down payment, but then our mortgage is also much lower, right? So annually, this property does about 160K in revenue. And I would say of that, we keep about $90,000 in profit from this property alone. And then the year that we purchased it, because of the short-term rental loop and bonus depreciation, we had tax savings of about $165,000 that we were able to take off of our taxable income this year. So it put us in a whole different bracket, which was absolutely incredible. And as you can see, this is such a cutie property. Again, QR code, if you want to scan it, you can check it out. And you can see why we're so obsessed with it. Okay. And then I also do want to just touch on the quadplex. Although we don't do short-term rental, again, this particular property, if you're familiar with Denver, it's near Sloan Lake. We bought this quadplex and it had long-term rental tenants in it, but we knew that we could get more cash flow if we turned it into midterm renters. And we also knew that it needed renovations. So we put about, like you can see on the pictures there, we put about $7,000 into each unit to take them from what they were to that, which really changed the vibe for sure. It increased the value of the property drastically. So we did some renovations on this particular property. And then we put about $7,000 into each unit, furnishing it. Because again, like I talked about with short-term rentals, like you're really thinking of the experience of the guest and, the design often reflects that. But in midterm rentals, you're thinking of the experience of the guest from a longer stay. A lot of tenants that stay in our midterm rentals, they're staying for sure at least 30 days plus. That's what makes it a midterm rental. But some of them are staying for months and months, paying that midterm rental fully furnished price, which again is about 1.5 to even 2x what the long-term rental rates would be. This property was $1 million. We did a down payment of $15,000. We did a very creative finance structured deal, a seller finance deal, which is like something I love geeking out about. We've sold properties as doing seller financing, and we've purchased properties with these creative financing strategies. So I can get more into that, but I'm not going to go into the specifics of all of it. But basically, purchase price $1 million, down payment 15%, seller finance deal. So we didn't use a traditional loan product because we worked out the deal with the seller. And you can check out the Airbnb listing with that little QR code there. Okay. Now, this is a client property in Blue River. This is the next place that we want to purchase something. This is right next to Breckenridge. So what's cool about Blue River is you can get such an incredible property and you can get it at a little bit lower of a price than Breckenridge just because it's right next to Breckenridge. But this property crushes, and I just wanted to show you this as a higher end example. So the purchase price on this was 2.6 million. But what I want you to notice is these particular clients were able to write off against their taxable income because of bonus depreciation $600,000. So they're high income earners, but taking them into a totally different tax bracket, getting to write off $600,000 of their active income. They did an investment loan with 25% down, and this property does about 270K in annual revenue. So just things to keep in mind. When I'm talking with clients, like sometimes the goal is cash flow, sometimes the goal is tax savings, and sometimes it's a combination of both. And so it really just depends on what you're looking for and making sure that you're working with an agent who takes the time to understand your goals and your vision. And like it sounds corny, but I tell my clients that I'm working with, like my goal is not to buy you one property or like work with you on your first investment property. My goal is to help you figure out what the vision is for your life and that you're buying property two, three, four, five, six with me because it's just we know what you're looking for and we know how to structure these things to make sure that it fits into your bigger vision to create more freedom, options, stability, finances for you. Okay, so real quick on just buying from out of state, because this is sometimes a concern that people have, I just want to make this really simple. It's very common. More than 50% of our clients are out of state investors because Colorado is such a desirable place to invest. So, of course, there's virtual and FaceTime tours. I love doing a FaceTime tour. And especially like when you're working with an agent, like obviously if it's in Colorado, I hope you'd work with me. But if it's not in Colorado, it's like an agent that really knows you and is willing to take the time to understand like what do you like? Like what are you looking for in an investment property? That makes this even more simple if you're an out-of-state investor because they can understand what you're looking for. So when they walk through a property or if I walk through a property for one of my clients, I'm like, "Ooh, I know they would love this because of XYZ," right? And what's so interesting, so when we bought our first short-term rental Peach House, that property is about 10 minutes from where we now have our primary home. And what's interesting is, and even back when we lived in an apartment, what's interesting is my husband would just pop over to the property all the time because it was so easy to just pop over to the property. But as we started to grow our portfolio and some of the properties that we purchased were further away, we had to implement systems immediately. So I actually think it can be really advantageous if you don't have the ability to pop over to your property and you automate all of your systems and your messaging and you figure out who your handyman is and like you've got your cleaners. And these are things that I am working with. If you're working with me as your agent, like I'm helping you with all of the resources and vetted referrals and getting you from not just identifying the property, but all the way through purchasing the property and then launching it as an active Airbnb. But when you're farther away from your property or when you force yourself to not pop over to your property, you just implement better systems, which gives you a lot more ease as you're continuing to grow as well. And then, like I said, like, especially if you're working with me, it's like I have so many local vetted referrals that I personally know or that we've worked with other clients. So it's also like you're kind of buying a real estate asset, but also a business in a box. And then, of course, you're always able to do remote closings as well. So just want to reiterate again, like 50% of the clients are out of state. So that's not a problem whatsoever. If that's something that's in the back of your mind where you're like, I need to be close to it. I've talked to so many new clients that are like, you know what, my family and I, we live in California or we live in Seattle or we live in Austin, but we love Colorado. We want to come to Colorado a couple weeks a year. Amazing. Like having a property for your family to come visit that you own is so cool. And then the rest of the year, you're short-term renting it and you're cash flowing on that property and you're saving drastic amounts on your taxes. It's a really cool strategy. So let's talk about this short-term rental loop. So short-term rental owners can use a specific tax rule that lets you write off a big chunk of the property early through depreciation. So even if this property is making money and cash flowing, and it's like an active business, you can still write off that business as a loss, which means it can significantly lower your taxable income. It's called bonus depreciation. So typically in real estate, when you buy a property, the government wants to incentivize real estate investors and people creating places for people to live or vacation, right? Like create create real estate because we need it for people, the IRS normally lets you write it off slowly over the course of 27 and a half years. But bonus depreciation lets you front load those deductions into year one. So instead of writing off some amount for 27 and a half years, you're taking all of that accelerated to year one. And this is done through what's called a cost segregation study. So, like when you buy a primary home and you have an appraiser that comes out to tell you the value of the property. When you're doing a cost segregation study, which is super common, um, a special appraiser comes out to determine how much of this property are we able to write off. You can't write off land, but they look at a certain amount of value of the property. It's typically around 30 to 40% of the property that you'll be able to write off against your taxable income as a loss. And this is legal. I remember my first time doing this with my husband. I was like, babe, we're not going to pay taxes this year. Like, is this legal? I don't know. Like, you could probably pick up on this already. Like, I'm not going to do well in jail. Um, and it's totally illegal, right? So obviously I'm not a CPA. Consult your CPA or slide into my DMs or send me an email and I'm happy to recommend a CPA to you, but this is a completely legal tax strategy. The only thing to keep in mind is in order for you to take advantage of bonus depreciation, you have to self-manage your property, which again, especially if you're working with someone like me who understands this landscape or an investor-friendly agent who knows the short-term rental space, like you can automate a lot of this, but you have to self-manage it to take advantage of bonus depreciation that first year. And then you have to average a 7-day stay. So important to just keep that in mind. All right. Your loan options. So, like I said, primary residence loans, one of the clients that I actually was just touring with earlier, they are looking for a primary home that has a detached, what we call them in Colorado as ADU, accessory dwelling unit, a separate property that they can short-term rental to offset their mortgage, to literally bring their mortgage down super low or potentially cover their entire mortgage. And they're buying that property with a primary home loan. So a primary residence loan, you can get as low as 3 to 5% down. And I don't know about you, but when I first started thinking about real estate, I thought you always had to have 20% down because that's what people say. But you can have as low as 3 to 5% down with a primary residence loan. And the idea with this loan is that you have the intent to live there for the first year, which means that's the vision. Life circumstances can change, but a lot of investors that I work with that I know are using primary home loans to grow their real estate portfolio, getting into a house. And then even if you're not even short-term renting it, getting into a house, buying it with a primary home loan, saving up for your next down payment, and then getting out of that house, buying another primary home loan, putting long-term rentals or renters or mid-term renters, or if you're able to, short-term renters in that primary home to cover that mortgage, and you just keep scaling your portfolio that way. That's a beautiful way to build your real estate portfolio. If you're interested, obviously, in short-term rental, which I'm guessing you are, obviously, if you're on this, second home loans are probably the most popular loan products that a lot of Airbnb investors use, which are typically 10% down. The rules are it needs to be 55 miles from your primary residence or enough of a different location. There are some places in Colorado where you might not be 55 miles away, but it's such a different landscape because you're in the mountains versus downtown Denver metro. And most loan agents that you're working with can help you sort that out. But that's an option. The other thing, of course, investment loans. These can be 15 to 25% down. There's all sorts of different loan products out there. My husband and I have used all three of those top loans. And then also DSCR loans, which is a product that a lot of lenders don't know about. If they're not working with investors that you might not know about, go down the Google or ChatGPT spiral on DSCR loans. They're really cool because you qualify based off of the property's ability to cash flow. So the rental income rather than your personal income or off of your tax return. So that's a really cool way to get into the investment space if your property has a lot of potential to cash flow. So these are 4 loan products that I would definitely look into that could be really beneficial for you. So let's talk about what I see buyers get quote unquote wrong. I probably should have put quotes around this because this is literally personal opinion, but I really think fear or what people like to say that sounds a little bit more sophisticated is risk mitigation. Or they say, this is so common if you probably said this before, waiting on the market or waiting until they know more or waiting until they find the perfect deal. But truth of the matter is like old school real estate principles. Buy a property, get in the market, and then wait while you're in the market because that property is going to be worth more in 10 years than it will be in 20, 20, and it'll just keep going up in value. It'll keep appreciating. And I just think fear keeps us on the sidelines where we tell ourselves the story, oh, like, good for them. They're investing in real estate. And we have this story that we're feeding into of like, I could never do that. Or we don't realize what are options that are available for us because we think we have to have 20% down. But in reality, like, you could get into a property with 3 to 5% down with a primary residence loan. Or maybe you're thinking you don't have the option of offsetting by doing some sort of a house hack. Or, you don't know who is in your life that would want to partner with you to buy a short-term rental property and you guys could split the profits. Like there's so much optionality. Like whatever you look for, you're going to find. So if you look for opportunity, like you're going to get yourself in the game. And I'm a huge proponent, if you can't tell by now already, of helping you create more options. And like we've got one shot here on this planet. Like I want you to love the life that you have, that you're building. I want you to feel like you've got some freedom to do it your way. Another thing a lot of new investors focus on, and honestly, even tenured investors can get caught up in this sometimes, is they focus too much on a deal versus a good property that will hold its value and appreciate over time, right? So, like using Peach House, one of our properties as an example, like we didn't get the best deal on that property. Some of our other properties we've gotten really crazy deals on, but this was such a good property. Like I literally sometimes I'm like, I would love to live in Peach House. Like it's even nicer than our primary home. Like, but the property makes too much money, so we'll stay in our primary home. But truly, it's like it's such a good property in a great appreciating area that we know is just going to be worth more in every single year is going to keep growing in value as we're getting loan pay down and we're making cash flow and we have those tax savings. Like it was just a good, sound investment. And one of the things that my husband and I are pretty adamant about is like when we acquire assets, like they're sound assets. Even our quadplex, it's not as like fancy as Peach House, for example, but that property is an area where everything around it is new builds and it's appreciating so much. So thinking about that, like a good property in a good location versus just trying to get a good deal and getting in for like a little bit less, like over time, when you zoom out, thinking about your portfolio that way. Another thing I see people do is like trying to do it all by themselves, right? Trying to design it yourself or do pricing yourself or thinking that like you can't have resources to help support you. We have hired a designer for every short-term rental. In particular, if you're in the Denver metro area, design really helps you stand out because remember, like Airbnb is a visual platform. It's pictures. And often it's women that are choosing the Airbnb. And it's like, we want to see a vibe. Like, we want to see a great design. It matters a lot. Like, the days of gray walls with your grandma's couch, like, just don't work anymore. There's too much competition. So it's really, working with a designer can be so freaking helpful to just help you stand out, especially in Denver Metro. Like I said, you want to have these properties that stand out. When you're in the mountains, rural mountains, you have the landscape of trees around you or a really cool area or mountain views, which can kind of offset because people just really want this cool cabin. Not to say design's not important, but it's maybe not as important versus if you're in a metro area with more competition. And then you go to resort mountains and like some people just want to stay in a cool place because of the location and proximity to skiing or hiking or biking trails or whatever that may be. But working with someone who can help support you is really important. Not automating or systematizing immediately is something a lot of first time buyers or investors get wrong. And I really will say that's wrong because you just don't have to make it so complicated. Utilize your resources, automate quickly. Like I said, this can be a huge advantage if you're not close to your property, which is why like out of state investors have a huge advantage. Or even for us with our mountain properties, like we have a 2.5-year-old and I'm pregnant. Like we're not popping up to those properties all the time. We have a great team in place and I've got like referrals out the wazoo for you if you're investing in Colorado. The other thing that I kind of touched on earlier, but I just want to make sure I hit home, is not treating your purchase like a business. When you're buying this real estate asset, it is a business too. And it has so much potential to change the trajectory of your life or your family's life from tax savings, from appreciation, from loan pay down, from cash flow, like all of these reasons. But like we got to treat it like a business. And that's something that I really love about being an investor friendly agent, like working with investors and having this lens on things is like, I want you to be excited about the property that you're buying, but I also want you to see the vision of how this can contribute to helping support your future vision. The biggest risk you can take will be not taking one risk at all, right? Kevin McAllister getting us with the, oh no. So, the process flow of working with me, or even if you're not working with me, like if you're working in Colorado, I hope you're working with me. But if you're not, things to think about. I really understand the desire to want to work with an agent who is like, your cousin Bobby who just got his license, or like your friend that you know from whatever, but making sure that you're working with someone who understands the landscape. Preferably someone who owns the asset class that you're buying, right? Like working with a short-term rental investor who's also an agent who understands because they've gone through the process themselves is so advantageous for you. So when I'm working with clients, this is kind of what it looks like from a process flow. I do an initial call where we're determining your buy box, right? We're determining what area are you most interested in? Where are you at right now? Stage of life? What's your big vision? Like really just getting to know them as people so that I can better understand what are the types of properties they might be interested in. And then connecting them with a lender if they don't have a lender that they work with already, which oftentimes people that I'm working with are interested in more investor friendly lenders who understand the investment space. So while we did that initial call, I'm then connecting you to a lender and we're jumping on a Zoom call relatively quickly where I can show you real examples of properties that are on the market. I can show you these like fancy little spreadsheets over here called performas and talk about strategy and legislation breakdown and give you numbers and projections so you can really understand the type of asset that you're purchasing and the potential that it has for your portfolio. Then we schedule tours, whether that's us going together in person to go see these properties so we can get a feel for what it's like to be in person at these properties to see what you think about it. This is a big purchase. It's emotional. I understand that. Even if it's an investment, it's still emotional, and I get that. Or virtual tours. And then I take you through the entire process, the contract process, inspections, like typical to a residential real estate agent, but also negotiations. And then what's different than a residential agent is like, then I'm connecting you with all the resources to actually launch this into the world. Like, I want you to have success as a short-term rental investor and Airbnb host. So I'm also connecting you with referrals and all of the different contractors that you might need or whatever you might need to launch your Airbnb. And then after that, I hope that you're just like, Keish, this was the best experience ever. I love working with you. And now we buy a ton of properties together in the future and ride off into the sunset. So you're ending ridiculously pumped, I would hope. I work at a brokerage called Good Neighbor. Full transparency, my best friend is one of the co-founders. And when I was exploring like where I wanted to work when I got my license, it was really a no-brainer to me that if I'm going to sell investment properties, I'm going to work with a boutique brokerage that has all of these resources for me as an agent, but also for our clients. We do tons of events, obviously, like webinars like this. I'm hosting an in-person event for those of you that are local to Colorado in March. All sorts of resources and even like a course that you have access to too, which I think can be really great. So I'll end with a Walt Disney quote. The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. And honestly, like real estate has just been so transformative in my life and my husband's life and our family and our future family as we're growing our family. I just really care about this. I love it. I love getting to help people paint the vision of what's possible for them. I love getting to hold your hand through the process and like talk you up a ledge if you're feeling kind of nervous and just to show you what's possible. So if you're interested in connecting on how I can support you in your real estate investing journey, you can send me a DM on Instagram at Kacia Ghetmiri. You can send me an email, Kacia at thegoodneighbors.com. You can text me. My phone number is 425-269-9315. If you want to scan that QR code, like you can find me. And I would be so honored and so pumped to get to help you in any way that I can. Like I said, this has changed my life so much, and I just believe it can really change yours. So I'm here to answer any questions and support you in any way that I can. But thanks so much for tuning in.